The sky over Celestara burned with colors not seen on Earth, blue flame streaks, silver clouds shaped like wings, and golden sparks that fell like rain, not water, but pure energy. Captain Elias Rourke stared out of the cracked window of his descending shuttle, gripping the control stick as alarms howled in his ears. He wasn't supposed to be here. Celestara was a forbidden world, its location erased from all charts, its people locked behind ancient shields that no scan could break. But the Orcs syndicate had broken something more valuable than the shield. They'd broken the last fragile promise of peace. Lias, a human ambassador warrior trained more in diplomacy than destruction, had been Earth's last offer for talks. He had gone alone, like Earth always had to, trusting in reason where others trusted in fear. The talks failed within minutes. The Orcs had wanted surrender, not terms. Elias's escape pod had barely cleared their flagship before a blast crippled its engines and sent him falling like a wounded star to Celestara's surface. Now, as smoke curled from the panels and his ship's AI fizzled into silence, Elias braced for impact. The shuttle crashed through strange white trees that sang when bent, then skidded across glowing sand before coming to a hard stop. Dazed, bleeding from his forehead, Elias kicked the hatch open and fell into the alien night. The air was warm and sweet, and above him, 2 moons watched like quiet guardians. He had no idea if he was being followed, had no idea where he was. He only knew that someone was standing over him. A tall figure, cloaked in shimmering silver silt, bent down, and through blurred eyes, Elias saw her face-smooth skin that seemed carved from starlight, eyes like polished violet glass, and a glowing sigil on her brow that pulsed like a heartbeat. She touched his cheek, her hand cool and steady. "You're real?" she whispered, and Elias blinked, unsure if she was speaking English or if something in this place was translating for her. She leaned closer, her voice trembling as if she were saying words she'd waited a lifetime to speak. "Will you marry me?" Elias blinked again. Key's mind wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Who she was, where he was, what just happened, but his mouth only said one word. "What?" The woman helped him sit up, her movements fluid and precise. Around them, golden leaves fell like feathers, and lights floated in the air, neither insect nor machine. "Okay." She introduced herself as Sorelia, princess of the Lumari Dominion, and her voice carried not just rank, but a deep loneliness. She explained that her people had long hidden from the galaxy after an ancient betrayal. A prophecy passed down from generation to generation spoke of a sun-blooded one, a stranger from the stars with fire in his heart, who would awaken the silent cities and unite the lost threads of their world. No one believed it anymore. Not truly. But Sorelia had come to the crash site after a vision pulled her from her sleep. "I see," she said. Elias matched the vision exactly: his face, his eyes, even the wound on his brow. Elias was too tired to argue. The pain in his body told him he wasn't dreaming. The Orcs might still be hunting him, and if they found the city, they'd do worse than hunt. Sorelia offered him shelter, and he accepted with a cautious nod. 2 cloaked figures emerged from the trees and helped lift Elias onto a floating platform that hummed softly as it moved. As they traveled through glowing forests and over crystal-clear lakes, Elias realized that this world was unlike any he had ever known. Natural beauty mixed with forgotten technology, singing towers and floating gardens, all hidden from time. They reached Aurelian, the capital, which rose like a crown of light in the center of a valley. The city was covered by a translucent dome that shimmered with protective energy. Inside, everything felt alive. The buildings pulsed like breathing creatures, and the streets sang beneath their feet. As Sorelia led him through halls of carved crystal and living vines, Elias noticed the way people stared, not with fear, but with wonder, like they were seeing a ghost. She brought him to the High Council chamber. A great room lit by a sky made of illusion, showing stars that no telescope could name. There, the elders gathered tall regal beings with glowing robes and unreadable expressions. Sorelia told them of the prophecy, of the crash, and of her vision. The council debated in a soft, musical language that Elias couldn't follow. He stood there, feeling like a relic, the only human in a hall of myth. But then one of the elders stepped forward and spoke directly to him in near-perfect English, a language they claimed hadn't been used on Celestara in thousands of years. "You may not be who we expected," the elder said, "but fate does not always ask for permission." Sorelia turned to Elias, her eyes full of hope and fear. "You fell from the stars at the moment we needed you most. I know this is sudden, but I must ask again, not for prophecy, not for my people, but for myself. Will you stay? Will you stand beside me?" Elias looked into her eyes and saw not just the weight of duty, but the ache of someone who had waited too long to believe in anything again. He didn't have an answer yet, but he knew one thing for certain. The Orcs would come, and they would not come in peace. If he was going to survive on, if Celestara was to remain free, then he would have to become something he had never been before. Not just a warrior, not just an ambassador, but a symbol. Symbols, he knew, had power, even when the world forgot them, especially then. As the chamber lights dimmed and the council fell silent, Elias took a breath, turned to Sorelia, and nodded, not to the marriage, not yet, but to the beginning of something larger than either of them. And far above, in the sky beyond the dome, a shadow moved, the first sign that the Orcs syndicate had found them. The battle for Celestara was only beginning, Captain. Elias Rourke stood on a high balcony overlooking the glowing city of Aurelian, feeling the warm breeze of Celestara brush against his face as strange flying lights moved like slow birds across the sky. It had been only one day since his crash, one day since Princess Aurelia asked him a question that still echoed in his mind. "Will you marry me?" And though his answer had been uncertain, the path ahead had become clearer with each hour. The Orcs syndicate, cruel and powerful, had likely tracked the energy spike from his crash, and they would come soon. Sorelia, standing beside him in her silver robes, told him that the Council of Elders had agreed to speak with him again in the morning. Some were still unsure whether a human could be trusted. Elias understood their fear. He was a stranger from a forgotten world, with no proof beyond a broken ship and a bleeding forehead. But he knew time was running out. As they walked through Aurelian's corridors, Leah saw more of Lumori life. Children drawing stars on glass walls, old scholars tending to books that floated in the air, and machines that moved not with gears, but with soft, singing crystals. Everything felt like it belonged to a dream, yet danger was real and growing. That night, Sorelia took him to the Hall of Archives, a vast room filled with glowing pillars of light that held the memories of generations. She showed him the prophecy, again recorded in a voice older than the stars. It spoke of a warrior, not born of Celestara, marked by fire and fall, who would bring balance to a world afraid to reach out. Elias asked her if she believed he was that person, and she looked at him with soft eyes and said, "I believe you are what we needed, not what we expected." That sentence stayed with him, heavier than any weapon he had carried. The next morning, the council gathered. The chamber was lit with the sky that shifted color with the motion, and the elders sat on seats shaped like crescent moons. Elias stood at the center. No weapons, no armor, just his voice. He spoke not of destiny, but of unity. He told them about Earth, how humanity had once been alone, how they had fought not to conquer, but to survive, how they had learned to build peace after fire. He did not beg for trust. Instead, he asked for a chance to prove himself. One elder, named Theron, stepped forward and challenged him not with words, but by placing a small glowing device on the floor. It unfolded into a projection of a broken world, one that resembled Earth long ago. Theron asked Elias what he would do if given command. Elias knelt, touched the projection, and spoke of rebuilding, not ruling. He told them peace must be chosen, not forced. Council murmured, uncertain. Then Sorelia rose and told the truth that she had seen Elias disable a hostile drone with only instinct and a broken tool. No weapons, no violence. That he had risked his life to reach them. Slowly, the council came to agreement. Elias would be granted the honorary title of Bridge Speaker, the first human to stand with Lumori in over 1,000 years. The title gave him access to their technology, their history, and their people. Sorelia walked him through the ancient vaults where Lumari tech was stored. Elias found drones built for healing, suits that responded to emotion, and engines powered by sound waves. With permission, he combined some of these with his own crash ship's systems to create a protective grid around Aureliana's soft shield that could hide energy, signatures, and scramble long-range scans. It would not stop a full attack, but it might buy them time. Suspense grew each day as Orcs ships began to appear near the edge of the solar system, silent for now, but watching. In response, other hidden Lumori cities began to contact Aurelian cities that had once sealed themselves away. For the first time in centuries, they spoke again because of Elias. The outsider, who had reminded them what fear had made them forget. Some even sent envoys, curious about the human who spoke like thunder but walked like calm water. Elias never claimed to be a hero. He worked with engineers to improve defenses, trained volunteers in emergency response, and listened more than he spoke. At night, he met with Sorelia in the star garden, a floating platform filled with light vines and open sky. There, she shared stories of her childhood, of lonely nights watching the stars, wondering if the outside galaxy had forgotten them. Elias told her about Earth, about cities under domes, oceans poisoned, then cleaned, and how humans learned to breathe hope again. As days passed, people began to believe, not just in the prophecy, but in choice. One evening, a Lumari pilot named Arvin told Elias that his village wanted to join the Alliance. The next day, it was 5 more villages. The Alliance was not signed in stone, but built in quiet words and shared meals. Then, one night, a warning sounded. A stealth drone had pierced the outer shield. Elias and Sorelia rushed to the control tower. The drone had scanned the city before being caught by the net of light. It meant the Orcs knew Aurelian existed. The city had maybe days before contact or worse. Elias looked at the map. There was still a chance to negotiate. He asked Sorelia for permission to send one final message to the Orcs. She hesitated, but agreed. In the message, Elias did not threaten or plead. He told the truth, that Celestora was a peaceful world, not a target, that humans had chosen to protect it, not for gain, but for belief. The message was sent into space. No reply came. A silence stretched. Sorelia stood beside Elias on the tower balcony and asked, "If this is our last calm night, what would you say to me?" Elias didn't answer right away. He looked at her, this alien princess who felt more human than many people he had met on Earth. Then he simply said, "I would tell you that I believe in what we're building, okay? And I want to help protect it, not just as a warrior, but as a man who's found something worth staying for." Sorelia smiled and reached for his hand. The stars above them shimmered, but behind that beauty, a shadow loomed. The Orcs were coming, and the alliance they had started would now be tested in the light of what came next. The first tremor came at dawn, a soft vibration that rolled through the ground, like the heartbeat of something deep and old, waking beneath the city of Aurelian. And Captain Elias Rourke rose from his rest with the feeling that something had shifted in the air, not a threat from above, but something hidden below. The Orcs Syndicate had not yet attacked. But they had gone silent after the drone incident, and that silence was more dangerous than war. Like a predator crouching before it strikes, as Elias stood on the stone bridge leading to the central tower, Princess Soralia met him with worry in her eyes and a message in her hand. A sealed crystal scroll sent by the Council of Elders requesting his presence in the Chamber of Trials. He had never heard of this chamber before, but the name alone made his pulse quickened. When they arrived, the hall was darker than usual. Its glowing walls dimmed to shadows, and the air was colder, as if touched by time. The elders stood in silence around a large stone disk in the center of the room, covered in ancient symbols, and encircled by faint golden dust that shimmered when touched by light. Elder Theron spoke first, his voice calm but firm, explaining that the council had received visions from the memory cores, records left by the ancient builders of Celestara that sometimes awoke when history began to repeat itself. The cores had warned that before a true alliance could be sealed, before any warrior could lead in the defense of Lumori lands, they must pass the trial of echoes, a test not of strength, but of soul, to prove they were not only chosen by chance, but worthy by will. Elias listened in silence, then stepped forward without protest, because he had always believed that leadership must be earned, not given. The elders placed a small sphere in his hand, a smooth, warm crystal that pulsed like a living thing, and as soon as his fingers closed around it, the room vanished in a blink, placed by a black space filled with faint whispers and flickering lights that formed shapes from his memory. It was not a dream, but something far deeper. The trial had begun. The first vision showed Earth, not as it was now, but as it once had been: broken cities, smoke-filled skies, soldiers yelling in ruined streets, and Elias saw himself running through the ruins, dragging a wounded friend behind him, his arms weak, his breath short, but his will unshaken. He had seen this moment before. He had lived it. But in the vision, his friend cried out and asked to be left behind. Elias froze. In real life, he had refused and pulled him to safety. But now, the vision changed. If he dragged his friend, they both would die. If he left him, he would survive alone. It was a cruel question, and the trial waited for his answer. Elias dropped his weapon and lifted his friend again, knowing the risk. The vision shattered like glass. Another began. This time, he stood before Soralia, her eyes filled with doubt, her voice cold. She accused him of lying, of using the prophecy for power, of leading her people into false hope. Around them, fires burned. Lumar's citizens fled in terror. Orcs' ships rained light down from the sky. Elias tried to speak, to explain, but no words came. The trial was showing his fear of failure, of losing the trust he had only just earned. He reached for Soralia, but she turned to smoke. Again, the scene vanished. The next echo was quiet. Elias stood before a child, a small Lumari boy with golden skin and tear-filled eyes. Boy held a glowing flower, its petals wilting, and asked Elias why people had to fight. The question sank deep into Elias's chest. He knelt down and said, "Because sometimes protecting peace means facing those who don't want it." Boy nodded once and smiled. Then he vanished, and the space around Elias grew bright. At last, the final test began. Elias found himself in total silence, a mirror before him, and in it he saw not a soldier, but a broken man's scars, doubt, memories too heavy for one person. The mirror whispered to him, asking who he really was, without war, without a mission. He stood still, looked deep into the reflection, and said, "I am not a hero. I am a man who chooses to try, even when I fail." With that, the mirror faded, and light swallowed him whole. He gasped as he fell forward, back into the real world. landing on the trial floor with the elders watching in silence. The crystal in his hand cracked, then glowed bright, before dimming to dust. Elder Theron stepped forward and said, "You have passed. The echoes found your truth." Turlia helped him stand, her eyes shining with quiet pride, and the council, one by one, lowered their heads, not just in respect, but in acceptance. From this moment forward, Elias was no longer a guest. He was part of Celestera, yet there was no time for rest. That same evening, a scout drone returned from the edge of the solar field with troubling news. The Orcs syndicate had begun moving a fleet toward Celestera, slow and careful, their intent unknown but heavy with threat. The council called for immediate strategy meetings. Sorelia and Elias worked side by side, drawing plans on glowing maps, connecting villages, assigning patrols, and preparing defense lines. But something in Elias had changed. The trial had shown him shadows within himself, memories he had buried, choices he feared to make, but now he felt stronger, not because he had no fear, but because he had faced it. As the city of Aurelian buzzed with quiet preparation, lights dimmed for blackout drills, and children were moved to the lower gardens for safety, a strange calm settled over the streets. People no longer looked at Elias with caution, but with hope. The next day, the first Orcs message came delivered through a hacked channel. It showed an Orcs commander standing on the bridge of his warship, face hidden behind a dark mask, his voice deep and cold. "You have 30 hours to surrender the outsider and open your gates," the message said. "If you do not, we will turn your light into ash." The message ended. Silence followed. Aurelia turned to Elias, her hand reaching for his. "Faced the echoes," she said. "Now we face the storm." And Elias, voice steady, answered, "Then let's show them what real unity looks like." The clock had started, and the trial of war was about to begin. Dark clouds formed over Aurelian as the countdown ticked closer to zero. But while the people of Celestera prepared for war, a deeper silence stirred in the ground beneath the glowing towers, and Captain Elias Rourke could feel something pressing against his chest. Not fear of the coming Orcs fleet, but a strange tug from the memories left behind in the trial of echoes. The Orcs commander's threat still echoed in every corridor: 30 hours to surrender or be destroyed, and the council had agreed. No surrender, no retreat. Yet, even as defense grids powered up and shield lines pulsed around the outer rim, Elias felt a warning in his bones, a whisper from the past, still waiting to speak. While Sorelia led the efforts to organize emergency shelters and communicate with allied Lumori cities, Elias moved through the forgotten levels of the city. Old stone passages beneath the archives where Lumari records spoke of times even older than the first contact with humans. He followed strange flickers in the walls, crystal veins that pulsed when he passed, till he came upon a sealed doorway covered in dust and runes. It was Sorelia who found him hours later, her face pale from stress but curious when she saw the doorway and its strange shimmer. "This place hasn't been touched for generations," she whispered, and when they pressed their palms to the lock plate, the stone slid aside with a low rumble, revealing a deep stairway and a chamber lost in time. Inside, they found something unexpected: machines older than anything Elias had seen, some bearing human symbols mixed with Lumri script, and among them lay a broken data core, cracked but humming faintly. Sorelia placed her hand over it, and her expression shifted from confusion to shock. The core held the last recordings of a mission, long buried by both human and Lumori history and alliance, centuries ago, between Earth explorers and early Lumori settlers. A peace treaty that ended in betrayal. The core showed images of ships burning in orbit, and Elias saw it clearly: a human officer in uniform giving the order to fire first. Sorelia looked at him, quiet, and said, They erased this. Both sides. Elias nodded, his heart heavy, realizing that the fear the Lumari once had of humans wasn't just based on legend, had roots in a real war. One both species had agreed to forget, but the Orcs Syndicate had not forgotten. The core showed another truth. The Orcs were not just invaders. They were descendants of the Lumari who had been abandoned during that long-ago war, stranded in the outer systems when the old alliance collapsed. Over time, they had twisted their pain into hatred and built their empire on revenge. Elias realized the Orcs did not want to conquer Celestar. They wanted to erase it. And him. Sorelia's hands trembled slightly as she replayed the final message. Left in the core. A Lumari commander, ancestor to her bloodline, spoke with sorrow in his voice. If this recording is found, he said, know that truth does not always bring peace. But without truth, peace will never last. Elias stood up, anger and purpose burning inside him. They could not win this fight with weapons alone. Not now. The truth had to be told. Sorelia agreed, though the council might resist. Still, they returned to the high chamber that night, gathered the elders, and showed them the recovered core. At first, there was silence and murmurs of disbelief, of denial. But the core did not lie. One by one, the council accepted the truth. Some wept, others simply stared into the shadows. Elder Theron stood slowly and said, we have feared the Orcs because they are like ghosts, but they are not ghosts. They are our brothers, left behind in anger. The mood changed. The war was no longer just defense. It was a chance to stop a wound from growing deeper. Elias sent a message to the Orcs fleet. Using a postcode buried in the old records one they would recognize as ancient Lumray. The message was simple. I know the truth. I want to speak before blood is spilled again. For hours, there was no answer. Then, just before dawn, a reply came. One ship from the Orcs fleet would allow Elias aboard, alone, to speak. The council argued, fearful it was a trap, but Elias knew this was their only chance. Kalia walked with him to the launch bay, her hand in his. She said, you are not just fighting for us. You are healing something we were too afraid to touch. Elias smiled, nodded once, and stepped onto the old human pod they had repaired together. As he flew through the upper atmosphere, stars blinked into view, and ahead. The Orcs ship loomed dark, spiked like a shadow dragon. When he docked, silence greeted him. Then, a group of tall, armored figures escorted him down a black corridor to a wide chamber. Pete, where the Orcs commander stood waiting. His mask was off, revealing a face part Lumori, part changed eyes silver, scars across his cheeks, and a strange sadness in his gaze. You are the one from the prophecy, the commander said. Dean, but you also carry the mark of those who left us to die. Elias stepped forward and replied, that mark is real, but I did not choose it. I'm here to make sure no more are made. The commander's voice lowered. We were once brothers. Now we are shadows. Why should we believe peace is possible now? Elias told him the truth about the core, the lost recordings, the forgotten treaty. He spoke of what he had seen in the trial of echoes, of fears faced and futures seen. He spoke not as a hero, but as a man who had chosen to stay, to help, to love. The commander listened. Then he asked one question. Would you die to prove your truth? Elias did not hesitate. Yes, he said. The chamber went silent. Then the commander stepped aside. Sten lived long enough to prove it. Elias returned to Aurelian hours later. The sky still tense, the shield still raised but with new orders. The Orcs would not attack not yet. They had agreed to hold position for 2 days while the Lumori decided if peace was worth the price of remembering the past. Sorelia met Elias as he landed, And when he told her what happened, she wrapped her arms around him without words. Shadows had come close, but the light had not gone out. Not yet. And the next 2 days would decide everything. The sun rose slowly over Celestura, casting a soft golden light across the towers of Aurelian. But the glow felt thinner than before, as if the sky itself was holding its breath, watching what would come next. And inside the city walls, every person, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, moved with quiet urgency, 'cause they knew that time was running out, and the fate of 2 civilizations rested on a fragile hope. Captain Elias Rourke stood beside Princess Aurelia in the central garden, where the hearthstone glowed faintly beneath its crystal arch, pulsing in rhythm with the city. And for a moment, all was still, as if the world had paused to listen. The Orcs had agreed to a 2-day ceasefire, and 1 day had already passed. But the silence in the stars was more frightening than battle, for it held the weight of unknown decisions and old pain. And Elias could feel it pressing down on his shoulders, like armor made of memories. The council had gathered again, some hopeful, some afraid, and all unsure. For peace had never seemed so close or so fragile. And though they had watched the recording of the forgotten treaty again and again, and listened to the words of their own ancestors, many still questioned if trust could rise from the ashes of betrayal. Elder Thuran had said, "Even light leaves shadows," and the others had nodded, not in agreement, but in weariness. Elias had tried to remain strong, but inside he felt the pull of doubt, not because he feared death, but because he feared failure. And as he walked through the quiet halls of the city, watching children draw symbols of unity on the walls and young guards practicing beside veterans, he realized that the people had already chosen. They were ready to fight, but they wanted peace, and their eyes told the truth. Aurelia met him in the war room late in the evening, her cloak drawn close, her voice low, and said that the Orcs ship had sent a new message. Their commander, known as Kael'thor, wished to meet one final time knot in orbit. But on the surface, in the ancient ruins of the first Lumori temple that stood between the cities, long abandoned and silent, the choice was dangerous, but Elias agreed, knowing that risk was the only path left. The next morning, as the twin moons faded into the dawn sky, Elias and Aurelia traveled to the ruins, escorted by a small guard who stayed at the perimeter, while the 2 leaders walked alone into the temple's heart, where stone pillars rose, like silent watchers, and old carvings glowed faintly beneath layers of dust. There, Kael'thor waited, not in armor, but in dark robes, his silver eyes calm and guarded. Elias stepped forward and said, "This place is where it began." And Kael'thor replied, "Okay, then let it be where it is reborn." And with those words, "Okay," they sat across from each other on the ancient stone dais, the symbol of the twin stars, of Lumori and Earth carved beneath them. Aurelia watched from the side, her gaze steady, ready to speak if the silence became dangerous. Kael'thor asked, "Do you speak for Earth?" And Elias answered, "No, I speak for myself, for those who wish to build something better." And for a long time, no one said anything more. Then Kael'thor reached into his robe and pulled out a shard of metal, old and worn, with the seal of a lost Earth expedition burned into its surface. And he said, "This was all we had left when they abandoned us." His voice heavy, we turned it into a blade. Elias did not flinch, but took out the cracked crystal core from the temple archive, now sealed in a case of light, and placed it between them. "This is what we found," he said, "the truth buried by fear." Kael'thor stared at it, then looked to Aurelia and asked, "And you would welcome those who let your people suffer?" She nodded, slowly, "Only if they choose to protect, not destroying." Kael'thor's eyes narrowed. "And what of vengeance?" Elias met his gaze and said, "Vengeance is a hunger that never ends. Peace is a promise you keep." The words hung in the air like thunder waiting to break. Atia rose, stepped forward, and said, "If I return with peace, many of my own will turn against me." Elias stood too. "Then let them see that you did not kneel. You chose to lead." A long silence followed. Then Kelthor reached out and placed the shard beside the crystal. "Then I make a promise," he said. "One last chance." He left. He turned and added, "But if the skies burn again, we will not hold back." Elias and Cerelia returned to Aurelian with no celebration, only silence. And when the council heard of what was said, some still doubted, but none refused, for the choice had to be made. That night, a message was sent broadcast through the old channels across the solar relay, a declaration not of surrender, but of unity, that Celestara would open its archives, share the truth, and offer peace to those willing to stand beside them, not beneath them. The stars were quiet, but then, near midnight, lights appeared above the horizon. Orcs ships, silent and unmoving, forming a circle in orbit. And, from the largest vessel, a single pod descended, landing in the garden of the city. From it stepped Kelthor, not in war gear, but in ceremonial robes, carrying no weapons. The people gathered in silence as he walked through the city, and when he reached the Heartstone, he turned to Elias and Cerelia, placed his hand upon the stone, and said, "Let this be the first truth we write together." The Heartstone flared with light, brighter than before, pulsing with the weight of what had just begun. Still, not all was certain. In the shadows of the outer systems, not all Orcs commanders supported peace, and not all humans on Earth would understand this alliance. But in that moment, in the city of Aurelian, two people from two broken histories made a promise in the stars, not one sealed by power or blood, but by choice. And that promise, fragile and bright, was the beginning of something greater than any war could destroy. High above Celestara, the stars blinked softly, as if watching in silence the final chapter of a long, painful history. And down below, beneath the golden spires of Aurelian, the people moved through the city with hope in their steps and worry in their eyes, for peace had been declared. But peace was not yet safe, and as Captain Elias Rourke stood in the council chamber beside Princess Cerelia, both knew the hardest part was still ahead, making unity last. The Orcs fleet remained in orbit, most of its ships now aligned with Kelthor, who had risked everything by choosing diplomacy over vengeance. Yet, even he warned of unrest brewing among his own, as several commanders viewed peace as weakness and still hungered for war. The council had approved the forming of the Celestara Accord, a treaty that would unite humans, Lumori, and Orcs under a shared promise. But signing it meant trusting species that once saw each other as enemies, and not all were ready. In secret meetings, Elias heard whispers of sabotage, of spies, of unrest in outer cities where old grudges had not faded. And even Cerelia, wise and calm, seemed burdened by the weight of a crown tied to many expectations. Still, the signing ceremony moved forward, scheduled to take place in the Temple of Stars. It's an ancient site once built by the Lumori to mark peace among their own kind, now restored and glowing with fresh energy, filled with thousands of citizens and visitors from orbit. Elias spent the final day inspecting every corridor, working with Lumori guards and former Orcs warriors now sworn to protect the Accord. Yet, even with his team's efforts, something felt wrong, too quiet, too smooth, and the feeling grew stronger. As the hour approached, that evening, dressed in ceremonial armor bearing both Earth and Lumari crests, Elias stood beside Cerelia beneath the great arch of the temple, facing a crowd filled with tension and hope. And when Kelthor entered, flanked not by soldiers, but by diplomats in long, dark robes, a hush fell over all. The ceremony began with Cerelia's speech, her voice clear and strong as she spoke of truth, unity, and a future no longer ruled by fear. And Elias followed, his words simple and honest, reminding all that strength was not in weapons, but in the will to change. When Kelthor stepped forward, many held their breath, but he spoke not as a warrior, but as a man tired of loss, saying, "We were shadows once, but the stars still shined for us." And just as the accord was brought forward, sealed in light between three symbols, eagle, Lumeris, twin stars. And the Orcs' flame, a sudden tremor shook the ground, followed by a second, louder this time, and Elias spun just as the ceiling above cracked open with a sharp blast. Smoke poured in, and from the shadows emerged armored figures not aligned with Calathor rogue Orcs, extremists who had hidden among the guests, waiting for this moment. Chaos broke out as screams echoed through the chamber, but Elias acted fast, pulling Sorelia behind a pillar as a blaster fire erupted. Calathor shouted commands in the Orcs' tongue, trying to stop the traitors, but they were prepared. And worse, one of them carried a fusion core, a bomb designed to destroy the temple and everyone inside. Elias fought his way across the hall, side by side with Calathor, the two once enemies now locked in survival, as Sorelia used her connection to the Heartstone embedded in the temple floor to activate protective shields, holding back the worst of the blasts. They reached the bomber too late. The core had already begun to charge, glowing brighter with every second, and Elias knew what it meant. There was no time to disarm it fully. Only one option remained. He grabbed the device, shouted to Calathor to open the shield door, and ran toward the outer courtyard, away from the crowds, the core humming in his arms like a living storm. Sorelia cried out after him, her voice breaking through the noise, but Elias didn't look back. He reached the far end of the temple, found the old launch platform, threw the core into the sky with all his strength, hoping the arc would give it enough distance. Then the blast came, not fire, but light, a silent flare that lit up the heavens like a second sun. And Elias was thrown back by the shockwave, his body landing hard on the stones. When he awoke, minutes later, his ears rang, his vision blurred. But above him stood Sorelia, tears in her eyes, her hand on his chest. "You're real," she whispered, the same words she'd once spoken during the trial of echoes. And this time, they were not a question, but a promise. Calathor appeared behind her, wounded but alive, and said, "Your kind was once feared for your power, but now I see it is your heart we never understood." The accord was signed that night under the broken dome of the Temple of Stars, not as a perfect victory, but as a hard-earned beginning. And the people cheered, not just for peace, but for the ones who had made it possible. In the days that followed, Elias recovered slowly, but he never left Sorelia's side, and she, in turn, made it clear to her people that no decision would be made without him. When the Earth delegation finally arrived, they found a world no longer waiting for approval, but standing strong in its own future. And when the stars aligned once more over Celestara beneath the glow of the restored Heartstone, Sorelia turned to Elias, took his hand, and said, "The stars gave us a second chance. Will you stand with me forever?" Elias, battle-worn, but unbroken, smiled and replied, "I already did." And the two of them stood together on the high tower as the lights of three worlds danced across the sky, bound not by war or blood, but by choice, star-banded in every way that mattered.